I don't know how you all put up with me. I always bring these props. You know, you've been putting up with me now officially July 1st for 8 years. You guys... That's real penance on your part. Not my part, but your part. You know, if there's one thing among many things that we can say about Jesus, he was the ultimate pedestrian. He walked everywhere. I'm going to walk for a little while. Is that okay? I'll just walk for a little bit. That's my prop for today, my walking stick. I'm going to walk. Because Jesus walked a lot as he traveled. And that was something that was not usual in the time of Jesus, this traveling. You know, walking was the most normal means of traveling that time. And Jesus traveled a lot. And traveling was not usual, but there were some things that you did for travel back then. You did, for instance, commercial travel, even back then, for trade, buying and selling. You had to travel. You also traveled, the military traveled, to do conquests for ancient lands and peoples, for distant places. You also traveled for communication purposes. You know, they didn't have telephones. So you had to send somebody to send word to others in distant places. And then, of course, there was migration back then. It was usually forced migration, whether because of natural causes or man-made. And then there was travel because of pilgrimages and travel for missionary purposes. And that was what Jesus did. He was a missionary. He traveled. And he sent his disciples as missionaries. Now notice, among those reasons, I didn't say travel for fun, right? They didn't go for vacation back then. You know, vacations is relatively a new thing. I think when I read about that, vacations really kind of didn't start until the last part of the 19th, early 20th century, when travel became more convenient, more easy and quicker. Because back then, travel was dangerous. Travel, you know, you wanted to stay within your community and your family because that was your support. If you left that, there was a lot of risk involved. There was a lot of danger. And so you didn't want to travel outside of that because of those dangers, because of those risks. And yet, Jesus traveled. He walked. And he sent his disciples out. And he gave them instructions. The first part was, you can have a walking stick. You can have your sandals. Clothes on your back. I'm set. I'm ready to go. But it's the second part that I think is interesting because he's extending grace, an opportunity of grace for them, when he says, don't take with you money or food or a sack. That would be kind of like a luggage. You know, don't take extra things with you. Because what he's saying is put your faith and your hope and your trust in God. Recognize your dependence upon God. So now he's extending an opportunity of grace upon those whom he is sending out to be witnesses to the gospel. And he's also extending an opportunity of grace for those who will hear them, who will encounter them. When he says to them, whoever hears you and those who do not welcome you, shake the dust from your sandals. See, this was a public, symbolic way of showing shame, even rejection to those people. Why? Because there was a custom back then, an obligation, a duty for hospitality to strangers, not family and friends, because in the Mosaic Law, you had a steadfast, loving kindness to family and friends, but to strangers you had an obligation to give hospitality. You know, the word in Hebrew for stranger is zar. And zar is also the root for the word border. And so from going even farther back, even before Jesus, there was this connotation, there was this interlocking, this intermingling of meanings between border and stranger. There was a time where people would not even cross borders because you did not want to intermingle with strangers, because the stranger was foreign. They were suspicious. That was on the best of terms. Threatening on the worst of terms. And Jesus is sending his disciples out. And he's expecting them to give opportunity for those who would give hospitality. And there was 3 points, 3 steps in that process of hospitality. The first step of hospitality was to extend a temporary welcome to the stranger. The second step was to provide protection by way of lodging and food, protection from the elements, protection by way of safety. And then the third step I find fascinating. There would be hope that they would part as friends. The stranger comes as a stranger, but parts as a friend. You see, borders are crossed. Barriers are broken. And it was through that custom that when Jesus sent out his disciples, 2 by 2, that ultimately we now have the church. The church is the product of that. You are the product of that, where strangers not only become friends, but become friends of God, disciples, followers of Christ. The church, Catholic, means universal, where we are part of this worldwide community of different people, different borders, different barriers, different people of different ethnicities and cultures, languages. And when those disciples were sent out 2 by 2, they went beyond those barriers and those borders to then bring this community together, this kingdom of heaven here on earth. And Jesus continues to give that mission today. 2 by 2, meaning that it begins within the family, within friends, that we give witness to each other first. And then we go out to the stranger. And hopefully, by God's grace, those strangers become friends, not only for us personally, but then friends of God, followers of Christ. That we continue to make this kingdom of heaven here on earth continue to expand and grow, that we call the church. Amen. You know, St. Francis said something, and I think it applies well to what I'm saying here, at least metaphorically. St. Francis said that it's no use walking someplace to preach unless you're preaching while you walk. It's worth saying again. It's no use walking anywhere anywhere to preach unless you're preaching while you walk. And I think that's the message of the gospel today. as we continue to walk on this journey of life, may the Lord give us the grace to preach while we walk, to be witnesses of the gospel, and to continue to grow this church, the kingdom of heaven, here on earth. Amen? Amen. Don't forget your walking stick.